Today is Sunday, October 25, and I'm taping this episode after a few weeks of breakthrough toward an Israel-Hamas deal that was created through a series of statements and steps which together allowed for breaking the stalemate in that war. These events included Trump's declaration that Israel will not annex any part of the West Bank, which was followed by the publication of his 20-point plan that was endorsed by all parties, including by Prime Minister Netanyahu, who even claimed to have designed the plan and masterminded the process. Please note that each point that President Trump discusses has a few statements, which means that the 20-point plan is equivalent to a statement of 30 to 40 principles. Then there was also the publication of Tony Blair's plan for governance in Gaza, whose key ideas and even Blair's name appear and are referenced in Trump's 20-point plan. President Trump also pledged to the defense of Qatar, which now turns into a safe haven for Hamas leaders and militants and terrorists who will choose, if they do, to leave Gaza and end the armed struggle against Israel. All of these events led to the signing of the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement regarding phase 1 of the Trump plan and its near full implementation by Israel and Hamas. That implementation included a ceasefire, a realignment of Israeli forces within Gaza to the yellow line, which leaves Israel in control of 53% of the West Bank, release of all live Israeli hostages that were still held in Gaza, and then also some of the dead hostages that were buried in Gaza. We now have 13 bodies still in Gaza. And then there was also the opening of the Gaza border to humanitarian aid and Israeli release of Palestinian prisoners. During this whole process, Hamas reasserted its control within the Gaza Strip in the remaining 47%, and also took on some of the militias that were working with Israel in order to establish its dominance in that space. The 20-point plan of President Trump references his January 2020 Peace to Prosperity plan, which now becomes the only likely framework for advancing from phase 2 of the 20-point plan to a political horizon of Israeli-Palestinian relations, which will happen at some point in the future, within a few years at least. All of this is background to the conversation I'm going to be having in the next hour with Ambassador Dennis Ross and Raith El-Omari. Dennis and Raith, two dear friends of mine, are the two of the foremost experts on Israeli-Palestinian diplomacy and relations for the last decades. And together, we will try to have a deeper and broader understanding of the historic moment that we're living through. Dennis and Raith, it's great to have you with me today. Dennis and Raith, it's great to have you again on this podcast to discuss the recent developments in the Middle East and as it relates to Israeli-Palestinian relations and Israel-Hamas, the war in Gaza. And I think the two of you, or maybe together the three of us, we are really a very good team in terms of analyzing what's going on, and I am getting great feedback on our conversations. So I want to dedicate today's discussion to actually doing a deeper dive into the implications of the so-called 20-point plan of President Trump, which is, as I mentioned earlier, it's much more than 20 points. It includes closer to 40 different statements and principles about how to end the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. And it's also much more than a plan, because earlier there was a statement of Trump before the publication of the 20-point plan. There was a statement that there would be no annexation in the West Bank. There was a statement that gives immunity to the sovereign space of Qatar. There is also the Blair plan for the governance in Gaza. And there have been a number of other events in the last 2 weeks. We have seen the visit of Trump, then the visit of Vice President J.D. Vance, then the visit of Rubio as Secretary of State, and other visits. We're seeing deployment of American forces in Israel, in Kiryat Gat of all places. So there are a lot of things that are going on, but I'd like to start us off by actually an analysis of the 20-point plan. I mean, when you're looking at this document, what are you thinking? What does it mean for moving forward? Dennis, let's start with you.
Well, it's interesting to me because it's an aspirational outline with a set of guidance or principles that are designed to get us from not only ending the war, getting the hostages released and ending the war, but actually setting in motion a process that is supposed to lead to much broader peace. One of the things I am struck by is that it includes, among other things, a fundamental construct as it relates to Gaza, but that's also tied to reform with the Palestinian Authority. The construct in Gaza is disarmament for Israeli withdrawal and for reconstruction. No disarmament, no demilitarization, no Israeli withdrawal, no reconstruction in Gaza. Reconstruction in Gaza is to be the first step in a much broader plan, but it's tied to reform of the Palestinian Authority. Prime Minister Netanyahu may say there's no PA role. That's not true. Built into this is a PA role, but the PA has to be reformed,
Dennis, so
and the
just
reform has to be for real.
yes, I just want to say you just referred to effectively three phases, at least three phases that are kind of embedded into the 20-point plan. There is phase one, which we are in right now. Essentially, it's Israeli realignment within Gaza and Hamas taking over the control and the policing of Gaza of about 50%, 47% of Gaza. Israel remains in 53%. Live hostages were released. Israel released Palestinian prisoners. Now there is an attempt to return the dead bodies of the Israeli hostages. All of that, let's call it phase one. Then you spoke about, then everybody is speaking about phase two. But what you're saying is that phase two is actually broken down into two subcategories, right? Category one is withdrawal of Hamas, demilitarization, further Israeli deployment, introduction of the International Stability Force, and the beginning of the reconstruction, right? This is, let's call it phase
That's correct.
2A. And then there is phase 2B, which you mentioned, in which the Palestinian Authority is somehow taking over responsibilities in Gaza from the International Security Force and the technocratic government. Is it
That's
fair
correct.
to summarize what you said?
Yes, but I just want to reinforce the point. It's not the PA as it currently exists, it's the PA that will be reformed. And the challenge of reform is no less daunting than the challenge of demilitarization of Gaza. The PA will not willingly reform, and the reform has to be something other than rhetorical. And if it's for real, by the way the language is written in point 19, I think I'll quote it. While Gaza redevelopment advances and when the PA reform program is faithfully carried out, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. Now, that's an end game,
That's
but
even
that end
phase
game
three.
is dependent on several factors.
That's even phase three, we could say, right? It's
Yes,
beyond phase two. So effectively, what you're saying, what we're saying is that the 20-point plan of Trump actually embeds current phase one, phase two, which is kind of broken down into two major phases, sub phases, let's call it 2A and 2B, and then third phase, which is basically political horizon. We used to call it permanent status, right?
right.
Wraith, let's go to you. I mean, how do you see the 20-point plan?
I mean, first of all, um, look, even if we don't move beyond phase one, I do believe that this was a major achievement. And it's worth pointing out because we're going to be discussing a lot of the complexities further on in our conversation. So we should kind of put this as a marker. The way I actually see it is you said it's more than a plan. It is more than a plan and it's less than a plan. It's more than a plan because, as you and Dennis said, it has a lot of components, and I would add as well two other components. One is the regional envelope in which this is all happening, which is very interesting. But also, in addition to the security, international security or stabilization force, there is this idea of interim governance, which itself raises a number of both challenges and opportunities. However, the nature of the this is that a lot of focus, a lot of detail on phase one, understandable, justifiable, and a lot of vagueness on the rest of it. And what this vagueness is creating right now, as we speak, is every actor trying to shape what each of these kind of subsequent phases are gonna look like. Are the Qataris and Turks gonna be leading this process? Are the Egyptian or are the Emiratis and Saudis coming in? So this ambiguity we have is creating a lot of diplomatic positioning in terms of trying to shape where things move forward. So yes, there's more than a plan, but because of the vagueness, I think it's not clear to me at this moment where things will be heading until things crystallize.
So I actually want to break.
Giddy, can I add one point to what Ray said?
Can I just add something and then bring it back to you, Dennis? So,
Okay.
Ray, let's put the issue of ambiguity, may I say constructive ambiguity, let's put it to the side for a moment. I do want to, you started mentioning about the interest and the dynamics that are happening right now in the transition from phase one to phase two. There are forces that want to move forward to phase two. There are forces who want us to get stuck in phase one. So these dynamics are already unfolding. Dennis, you wanted to come in.
I did, because I think from a diplomatic standpoint, while you want things to happen very quickly, the more momentum you can capitalize on, the more everyone will believe this is actually going to happen. It means you need the Board of Peace to be established quickly. It means you need to have the technocratic committee that's going to govern or administer things day to day to be established quickly. It means you need this international stability force to be established quickly and with a clear mission and mandate. And that gets to the broader point I wanted to make, which follows on to what Raith was saying. Every one of these 20 points is understood differently by all the parties. And that's one of the reasons you see this kind of rush to try to define what each point means. Each party is trying to define what the point means from a kind of factual basis. The role for the U.S. at this point is not only to make certain things happen quickly, but to normalize understanding of each point. The U.S. should be, it's the Trump plan, the U.S. should be defining, this is what this point means, this is how we're going to interpret it, these are the steps we're going to work with to get these implemented.
Guys, I know that when we speak, we can go all over the place very quickly. I just want to help make it easier for our audience to follow our conversation. So first of all, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper on what are the forces that don't want to see the transition from phase one to phase two, that are actually now working against progress. Raith.
Actually, to be honest, the only force right now that I see not wanting at all to maybe to move to phase two probably is the Israeli government. That's the one that I see has a lot of interest in keeping things where they are because the next phases create political problems for it. But I see
Huge
something
political
different happen.
problems. Can I also suggest that the Iranians don't want us to move to phase two?
Yeah, but to be honest, I'm less worried about the Iranians because right now they have fewer equities in the game. Or
No, they do
assets
have
to use.
Islamic Jihad over there. They
Yeah,
do
but
have Islamic Jihad on the
is
ground.
not a major issue. But actually, my concern is not who doesn't want us to move us to the next state, but who wants to shape the next stage in ways that might be counterproductive. You talked about constructive ambiguity. Look, I see Hamas, for example, wanting to move to phase 2 and 3 under one condition. That Hamas remains a relevant actor, if not at the forefront, then behind the scene. Today, there's an Egyptian effort to create a Palestinian agreement between Hamas and the other factions that will mandate the technocratic government or etc. This is could create problems down the road. So I don't see anyone right now really not wanting to move to phase 2, but I see a lot of effort from Hamas and its backers to make sure that phase 2 and 3 also incorporate Hamas and frankly give a platform for Hamas to reconstitute politically.
So you actually introduced like another nuance here, which is a conditional move to phase 2, which is what you're talking about in Hamas. I would say also slower move to phase 2, because every day that goes by, Hamas has a stronger hold of Gaza and their leverage increases. So there is one group that doesn't want to move to phase 2, and I think, Raith, you mentioned them. I think there are other regional forces who are against moving to phase 2. Then there's another group that says we want to move to phase two, but we want our interest assured. And then there is, of course, I think the Americans who want to move to phase two as soon as possible, and also probably the Egyptians and other players. Dennis, how do you see these dynamics right now? What are the forces that are pulling and in which direction?
See, I would even phrase it slightly differently. I think there are those who want to define phase two differently. They'll say, we're all for phase two. Israel's all for phase two, but what Israel wants to see is what Trump has said. Hamas won't be in control. They're disarmed. That's the key to phase two from the Israeli standpoint. And I think, at least in terms of its design from the American standpoint, in terms of where Turkey and Qatar are coming from, where Hamas is coming from, they're all for phase two, but they want to redefine phase two. So as Reit was saying, they want phase two and phase three to be one where Hamas remains a major player. Maybe they create even a different image for Hamas. Maybe there's some symbolic disarmament. But the key is to preserve Hamas as a political actor that has leverage and helps to define what the future of Gaza and the Palestinian movement is going to be. So here you have a Turkey, Qatar, Hamas, I'll call it axis. Egypt is somewhere between them because Egypt wants to be a manager of this process and believes the only way you can work that in an acceptable way is for Hamas to acquiesce. And for Hamas to acquiesce, there has to be enough in it for them so they'll go along. So that's one set of actors. The Saudis, the Emiratis, want to see Hamas disarmed. They are making their readiness to do reconstruction investment, not just assistance, but investment, contingent on Hamas being disarmed. Because their fear is if they're not disarmed and they can reconstitute, they'll do this all over again. So they're actually in a place, I think, where both Israel and the administration is, but the administration is also working very closely with the Qataris. You just saw the president's statements about his meeting with the Emir of Qatar, and he even referenced to the possibility that there'll be Qatari forces that would be part of the stabilization force.
Right. So these
assume,
contradictions are also the big advantage of the Trump administration, that they are basically in good terms in one way or another with all the stakeholders around Gaza, right? With the Qataris, with the UAE, with Saudi, with Egypt, with Israel, even with Jordan,
yes.
And so on. So they have a lot of leverage from all directions, and that's how they aligned the deal. That's how they aligned the 20-point plan and the Sharm agreement. This was their remarkable achievement. I do want to ask you.
Well,
I'm sorry.
The key to their achievement was that no one wanted to say no to Trump.
Exactly.
And the question is, how long does that situation obtain?
Right. So I just want to move to another section of our conversation. It's a little bit of a detour, but still I think it's relevant. That is to compare and contrast to the Declaration of Principles of the Oslo Accords of September 1993, and to see what we can learn from that experience. So first of all, I want to begin by actually contrasting. Raith, what's different between the 20-point plan of Trump and Oslo of 1993?
First of all, I think there is just kind of, this is primarily driven by a need for a ceasefire. So you see a lot of the focus on the ceasefire kind of things. There's the sense of urgency and concreteness in ways that we didn't see in the Oslo process. That was seen as a longer diplomatic process. But the two other things I would add. One is actually, Oslo was an agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. This is not an agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. There's no Palestinian signature anywhere, and Bibi was not in Sharm el-Sheikh. So this kind of is interesting in terms of stakeholders, etc. And it's key because the Oslo Agreement did include the mutual recognition. While this one does not address this at least at this stage. But the flip side of this is that this is actually an arrangement that has regional stakeholders in actually a concrete, almost formal ways, in ways that in Oslo we did not have. So it's interesting the kind of interaction between the regional and the forces and the Palestinian side. are the Arab countries going to come and, in effect, basically shepherd the Palestinians into a place where they can move forward? It's an inversion, maybe, of what we had in the past. And I'm not sure it's a bad inversion because the PA, for the reasons that Dennis mentioned earlier, does need a lot of kind of, let's say, adult supervision to move forward.
Right. So, look, the reason I'm suggesting raising this question is, first of all, Declaration of Principles. This is Oslo. This is the 20-point plan. When you read the plan, it's actually a declaration of statements. So here is one thing. The second piece is that both documents speak about some sort of an interim phase with Palestinian self-government that doesn't have full independence. Third, Oslo speaks about a permanent status. The Trump plan speaks about a political horizon. Both of them are speaking about massive international assistance that will come into the Palestinian system, the expectation that would be institution building and capacity building. There are all these elements of both documents that are, 32 years apart that are quite remarkable. So my question is to you, Dennis, is what can we learn? If we had to look at Oslo and we would go to the Trump team and say, hey guys, these are your 5 points. What should you do different than what we did in order to enhance the prospects of success? Dennis, what would be the 5 points?
Well, I don't know if I'd have 5 points, but I'd have two fundamental ones. One is where we started, the high level of ambiguity. I often say in public you can have constructive ambiguity because it allows each side to explain things. In private, it's destructive because inevitably it feeds a sense of betrayal when the steps aren't undertaken the way you think they should be. One of the big parallels I see with Oslo, Rafe pointed out, that was the result of a direct Israeli-Palestinian negotiation. The Declaration of Principles we were not a part of. And only after the fact did we come to see how the two sides interpreted the points very differently. I'll just highlight one example. There's supposed to be no change in the status of the territories. So the Israelis said, well, what that means is we won't annex and they won't declare statehood. And from the Palestinian side, they said every time you build a settlement, you're changing the status of the territory.
Right. So basically what you're talking about is that the interim period, this period that is in Oslo, between the signing of the agreement and then what was called permanent status, it became a period where everybody was kind of securing their positions. Everybody was aligning themselves to the future negotiations. And that's why instead of a period of confidence building, it became a period of non-confidence building.
Exactly.
So that's the first point. So constructive ambiguity helps you get to the deal. But then when you move after, you actually need clarifying agreements.
That's where I started. I would want the Trump administration to know they need to put enormous effort into making certain that each point is understood the same way. And if need be, because it's the Trump plan, it defines the meaning of each point. That needs to be done.
So that's one. What's your second?
But the second point gets back to what Rafe was saying. I think one of the most promising developments that we did not have in the 1990s or the year 2000 is an Arab sense of responsibility, an Arab stake in the success of this. We did not have that in the 1990s. There was a tendency they'll defer to whatever the Palestinians accept, that's okay with us. Now there's a different attitude, at least within the Gulf, because they realize if we leave it to the Palestinians, this will never be settled.
Right.
Because the character of their leadership or the lack of it is such, it'll never be settled. And it's important to us for our own reasons. We have a different agenda. We have different priorities. We also understand one of the things we've learned is you can't ignore this issue. We thought we could. Now we know we can't. We thought we could treat it as a slogan. Now we know we can't. Now that doesn't automatically translate into specific steps of taking responsibility. Now, part of that gets back to, again, what is the role of the Trump administration? It put together this coalition, but within this coalition, there are competing camps. I'm not even referring to the Israelis. I'm referring to what you might say, Turkey, Qatar, on the one hand, Saudi and the Emiratis on the other, and Egypt somehow going back and forth between the two. there's again an enormous need to somehow normalize that, reconcile that. That's a big lesson from the past because there's a new opportunity that we didn't have in the past.
Yes.
Actually, if,
Raith.
if I can just add something here quickly to what Dennis said, and it's going to sound very, very small and maybe even very banal. Requires an American address that can actually keep on putting the pressure and following up on these issues. Basically, the role that Dennis played under President Clinton and later on. Why? Because without that, because all of these issues that we discussed have sub and sub and sub issues, all of which will basically add up to where the construct is going to be. Until now, the Trump administration has been dealing with this in fits and starts. Witkoff comes in when there's an opening, he pushes things across the line. This is not a mode that can operate if you want to have an ongoing process that will succeed. You will need an American to be there to deal with every problem and every opportunity as they arise.
Right. So basically, we have three insights here about constructive ambiguity, about the participation of Arab countries and regional intervention to keep the momentum going, and also about the American kind of permanent leaning in to push the process forward. I want to suggest a fourth point, and that is the identity of the Palestinian partner. So we say the Oslo Accord of September 13, 1993, but there were actually two Oslo signings. There was the August 20 signing with one group, which was not the PLO. They were associated with the PLO, but it wasn't formally the PLO. And then there was the September 13 signing, which is 3 weeks later, then with the PLO. What happened between those two moments is that Israel actually understood that it wants to speak to a representative body of the Palestinians to ensure that whatever was signed actually represents and abides by the Palestinians. The reason I'm mentioning that is because, Raith, you mentioned the identity of the Palestinian partner. I understand that there's no agreement with Hamas. Okay, I get that. But the principal position of Israel not to deal with the Palestinian Authority is now becoming a major challenge for the American success. Because what the Americans need in order to move forward with legitimacy is a legitimate Palestinian entity legitimizing the technocratic government and the security forces in Gaza. So I think that there is another lesson to be learned here from the process, from the transition of the Palestinian entity from August 20, 1993 to September 13, 1993, compared to what is happening right now, where the Palestinian Authority was excluded from the Sharm Agreement, although Abu Mazen came later to the meeting in Sharm. And then when you move into phase two, I feel like there is a similarity there. Dennis, maybe we go to you on this.
I think there is. I'll just add one little historical footnote to what you're saying. So Christopher and I met with Shimon Peres and Foreign Minister Holtz on August 27th at Point Magoo. And Peres, in making his presentation to us, said, "This is not with the PLO." And I asked him a question. Then I don't know who it's with. I mean, if it's not with the PLO, who's responsible on the Palestinian side? So you're saying you haven't made the decision to recognize the PLO and to make them the party to this. And if that's the case, then I don't know who carries it out on the Palestinian side. I'm not saying that's what made the difference, but I made it very clear. You want us to embrace this. And for us to embrace it, we have to know who you're actually recognizing.
Right.
Now, what you pointed out, Giddy, in the end, we ended up with an exchange of letters on September 9th between Rabin and Arafat. So it was very clear who you were dealing with. I think your point is quite apt for today, because in the end, the 20 points talks about ultimately this is the PA, but the process of getting from the PA we know today to the PA that is presumed these 20 points is also not not clarified at this juncture.
So we have 4 points, 4 lessons, major lessons. I want to point to lesson number 5, if I may, to suggest to you, and that is the legislative effort, contractual effort that took place from Oslo until we had the interim agreement that effectively regulates life in the West Bank. So what we're looking at was a 2-year negotiation process with hundreds of people involved, right? Oslo is signed in September 1993, the interim agreement September 1995. In between, there is the Gaza-Jericho agreement. And then Arafat is coming in July 1994 to Gaza. And then there is more negotiations. And then there is, of course, before that, there was the Paris Protocol also. And then there is more negotiation until the interim agreement. Meanwhile, I want to point out that Blair, in his plan, has a suggestion that there will be this legislative arm of the technocratic government that will legislate in Gaza. This is a monumental legislative act, endeavor, let's put it this way. And I think, and in this period, from September 1993 to the Gaza-Jericho Agreement of May 1994, are the first suicide bombings. So all the detractors are leaning in and derailing the process. So I think that also the fact, a major difference between then and now is that now we do have a legislative framework. The Americans just need to decide to apply it in Gaza.
Actually, look, I actually see a major difference between that period and now. It relates to both point 4 and point 5 that you raised. Back in the 90s, there was no one contesting on the Palestinian side the representative nature of the PLO. The folks who basically were there in August were people who were proxies for the PLO, even though they were not. Today, actually, this is happening in a context in which representation for the Palestinians is contested. The way I see it, what Hamas wants to get out of this is to be recognized basically as the address for the Palestinians. This will impact a lot of these things that we talk about as we move forward. On every step, Hamas will try to say, look, you have to defer to us. The PLO right now and the PA are weak. And so, yet they can still be spoilers. So that's a dynamic to look at. But with a new interesting addition is not only kind of the technocratic government in Gaza, but the so-called Board of Peace. Because what we didn't have in the Oslo Agreement is an international supervision mechanism. This Board of Peace, which again remains extremely ambiguous, has the potential to become exactly that, both as an arbiter, but as something in which you can kind of mitigate some of these tensions and come up with certain frameworks. So this is kind of, I think, two new introductions and two new dynamics that will shape how things will move forward.
So basically, just to the audience, what we're doing here, we're kind of setting the stage to the big discussion we're going to have in a few minutes, which is what is required in order to move forward. So now I'm going to begin another phase of our conversation, which is just to explore with you what are the preconditions for the withdrawal of Hamas, for the introduction of the International Security or Stability Force, and for the reconstruction of Gaza. Let's start, I think, with the simplest part, which is, what do you think is the essential condition for the reconstruction of Gaza? What needs to happen for the reconstruction to move forward? Dennis, maybe we start with you.
If there is not a process of disarmament, one of the issues that has to be resolved is, how do you define disarmament? The term is used with no definition. Does it mean that every single Hamas fighter no longer has a gun? If that's the case, you'll never achieve it. Does it mean that all the rockets are gone, the anti-tank missiles are gone, weapons are generally decommissioned? Then you're talking about something, but it's going to be really hard to achieve. If you look at the 20 points, it talks about a phasing out of the Israeli presence over time. But it's tied very much to this process of decommissioning of weapons. So who is going to oversee it? Is that the International Stability Force? Here again, I come back to the issue of there is no agreement today on what the mandate and mission of the International Security Force will be. The Trump administration has embraced the idea that there needs to be a UN Security Council resolution for this. I would hope that Security Council resolution is very targeted and very narrow in terms of identifying the mandate and the mission of the International Stability Force. And I would say, under the rubric of the Board of Peace. On a day-to-day basis, that international stability force needs to have its marching orders, but it needs, I think, to get those marching orders from the Board of Peace. And the Board of Peace has to have a very clear definition of what is disarmament, what does the process look like, what does each phase require, who is doing it. All that needs to be worked out, because there will be no reconstruction without it. There'll be no withdrawal
S-
without it. It's a daunting task, but the sooner you define that mandate and mission and connect it to the mandate and mission of the Board of Peace, the sooner I think you have a chance of actually working in the right direction.
So, Dennis, let me just distill two key ideas that you mentioned. Number one, there has to be withdrawal of Hamas as basically a governing military and policing force in Gaza. Hamas has to be out. This is the first thing. And of course, Hamas has to leave with its governing powers, meaning it no longer relinquishes governance in Gaza. This is the first condition for reconstruction. And the second thing, which I think you implied, but clearly you indicate, is that there have to be security arrangements between Israel and the security forces and the international security force. There has to be security arrangements, hot pursuit, called rules of engagement, because otherwise we could be in a disastrous situation where there is, friendly fire between the Israelis and the international security force. So these are two.
Look, the good news, just so you know, one thing the administration has done, even though it doesn't yet really have the function, but one thing it's done is set up a mechanism for that. The civil military coordination facility that has been set up in southern Israel,
Right.
which now has lots of different representatives there, but it's a built-in means to be able to coordinate between, once you have the International Stability Force there, this is the means for coordinating between that and the IDF.
Right. So we've covered security, right? Let's move to other conditions for the reconstruction.
I mean, it's actually related to that, which is what is the Israeli role and presence during this period. I mean, first of all, just to again reiterate the point, without demilitarization, there will be no reconstruction. And this is not only the view of Israel and the United States, this is the view of the key countries that will come in and do the reconstruction. However, as we know, this is going to be, look, disarmament, or what they call it now, decommissioning, as well as Israeli withdrawal, are going to take time. So here again, we talk about interim steps, and these are not simple. I mean, you saw, I think, Kushner talk about starting the process in the areas which are Hamas free. Well, what does that mean? What is the relation between reconstruction and the Israelis, who invites the countries to do reconstruction? I can tell you from conversations with Arab officials over the last few days, none of them seem terribly keen to come and start reconstruction in areas which are completely under Israeli jurisdiction. So I think these are...
No, of course, because the jurisdiction will change. Because
Well, I mean,
I think what you're talking about is the geographic scope of the reconstruction has to be predetermined. Meaning, if you're doing if you're doing, let's say, a major planning and zoning plan, and you want to put out roads, right, that go north south or east west, you want to put a desalination plant, you want to put in a sewage treatment plant. These things, these major infrastructure projects cannot be exposed to movement of alignment of Israeli forces here or there. That's why I just don't see it happen in terms of reconstruction. So to me, what you're saying is that there has to be some sort of clarity on the geographic scope of the area of reconstruction. In this respect, it's very, very important that Trump already said that there will not be Israeli annexation in Gaza, which means all of the Gaza territory will eventually be Palestinian and Arab, and it needs to be planned for reconstruction. Am I correct to infer this from what you're saying?
in addition to the geographic scope, again, it's important to clarify what is going to be the role of Israel in the areas that this will come under, because we do have a contradiction here. You know, you want to start reconstructing in areas that are not under Hamas. Let's say Rafah, for example. Great, but these areas are not under Hamas because they're under the Israelis. The Arab countries will not be terribly keen to come in and basically be constructing under with the Israeli soldiers there watching them. So this requires, questions that raises questions of what is the who replaces the Israelis? Is it an international force? Well, what's the mandate of this international force? All of these complicated questions that I think everyone is just now starting. I mean, this conversation we're having right now, I think, is the conversation being had among officials everywhere. The risk with
That's why we want
taking
to
too
help
long,
them. The
Hmm?
goal is to help them.
The
We
goal
are
is to
here.
help them.
We are
Um,
here to share insights that they may find
Absolutely.
useful.
But I think, again, I mean, I just want to point out there is a time element here. Because as I think Dennis said from the beginning, the longer it takes, the more that Hamas entrenches, and the more facts on the ground are created, the more that the Egyptians will produce a list of Palestinian technocrats that is blessed by Hamas, etc. So there is an element of time to at least define the basics.
Right. Dennis, I want to go back to you, but before that, I just want to add three more ideas. First of all, clearly there needs to be a legal system, right? There needs to be a legal
Right.
system. Someone needs to be able to determine planning and zoning. If there is forget now Hamas terrorist, if there is a thief, if there is someone who does something, sorry, who apprehends them, how long are they being held, where are the courts, who appoints the judges, etc., etc. So there needs to be a legal system in place to allow this whole process of reconstruction. And that connects to another thing that we mentioned earlier, which is the legitimacy of the Palestinian technocratic government, which we have already mentioned. But then, according to Blair and according to Trump, within 2, 3, or 4 years, there is another transition to the reformed and upgraded Palestinian Authority. Right? So if I'm coming in for reconstruction, I need to have certainty, because reconstruction and infrastructure projects take years. During this period, there's supposed to be another transition, meaning this whole mechanism of governance, law, transition to the hands of the upgraded and reformed Palestinian Authority. All of that has to be clear. I think it's a precondition for the reconstruction effort to unfold, Dennis.
No, we started by saying what the 20 points represent are a broad set of principles and guidelines, but they need to be clarified so that there's one understanding, a common understanding of what they mean. And then each of these issues that relate to governance need also to be filled out. The Board of Peace needs to be set up soon and needs to be shown as operating, because there's one thing you were referring to before, Giddy. So long as there isn't an alternative administration to Hamas, it is Hamas that remains in control. So you need to have an alternative administration that's there. That alternative administration needs to have not only this kind of mandate coming from the Security Council, but it needs to be, in a sense, providing a basis for law and order. You have a vacuum in governance right now. And one of the reasons that Hamas was so quick to go in and go after the clans was not simply to go after those who they viewed as internal enemies. It was to send a message to the Gazan public: we're here and we're still in control, and don't even think that we won't be in control. You need to create an alternative to that. Everything that we're talking about in terms of what it takes to be able to carry out administration, all that's crucial, but it needs to follow the establishment of what is now an alternative administration within Gaza.
Right.
And that begs the question that Raith was raising. Where does that operate? Does it operate only in the area where the IDF still is? Is it going to operate in that other 47%? I mean, these are questions that have to be addressed, and they need to be addressed soon with pretty concrete answers.
Well, I believe, Raith, we're moving to you, but I believe that you can do humanitarian intervention in the 53% that Israel's control. For sure, you can do that. But you cannot do reconstruction in these areas because Gaza is too small and too intertwined between the 47% controlled by the Arab side, Hamas side, and the 53% of controlled by Israel. I just want to throw in another element, and that is that UNRWA has to withdraw. Not in the sense that, in the sense that we are not going to rebuilding refugee camps into refugee camps. The demolished refugee camps are, if they're being built, they're being rebuilt into permanent residences, right? In terms of healthcare, welfare, etc., education, this needs to be provided by the technocratic government, not by UNRWA. So that's another precondition, which I think needs to be in the UN Security Council resolution about the change of the mandate of UNRWA in Gaza, right?
I mean, I would look at it slightly differently. I mean, I fully agree with you that in terms of rebuilding the refugee camps and all of that, I mean, as a matter of fact, no one's going to come and basically say, hey, I'm going to pump all of these billions and, to build a refugee camp. And I think what would be, I mean, look, if you want to go and have a Security Council resolution that says there is no UNRWA mandate, you will not get that Security Council resolution. I think the best that we can hope for right now is de facto reduction of the areas or the spheres of operation of UNRWA without taking the extra step.
I am, by the way, I'm worried that if you begin to broaden the Security Council resolution too much, you're going to end up having something that is very hard to translate. I think I would focus very heavily on the mandate and mission of the International Stability Forces and its relationship to the Board of Peace. That, for me, if you don't,
This is the
if you keep
MVP.
it narrowly focused, you have much more of a chance of actually getting it implemented in a way that makes sense.
And you
This
can,
is
by
the
the way,
MVP.
you can
Go ahead.
structure that in ways that de facto pushes UNRWA away from the kind of problematic spheres without creating a political diplomatic kind of confrontation on UNRWA, one that frankly I don't think anyone can win.
Well, okay. So basically, we spoke about the preconditions for the reconstruction. Let's just speak about now for the preconditions for the deployment of the International Stability Force, the International Security Force. So one clear precondition already discussed, Dennis mentioned, is the agreed rules of engagement with the IDF, and it needs to have very clear territorial scope for its presence and operation. And the other point is that it has to be legitimate in the sense that it has to be invited by a Palestinian leadership. Okay, these are things that we already discussed. What else do you think is very important or essential for the International Security Force? Raith, let's go with you and then Dennis.
I mean, it's really the question of how the force relates to the question of disarmament. Because this is the one that I think right now is the biggest problem. Will the force come and disarm? And that requires a whole set of mandates and structures, etc. Or will this come after there is disarmament? Frankly, today, the momentum, again, as we see it in a process that's being shepherded by Egypt, the momentum is let's do disarmament as a political process with the acquiescence of Hamas because no one wants to come in and fight with Hamas. This is, I mean, when I talk to Egyptians, they will tell me this is the only way to do it. Of course, this is problematic. It's problematic because Hamas will only agree to disarm, even partially disarm, if they get a political return on this disarmament. So the biggest question is, will the security force come and be an aggressive, offensive security force that will disarm, or will it wait until Hamas agrees to disarm, in which case you give Hamas a veto over everything that moves forward? This is kind of the conceptual question, but the reality is, of course, it's very also complicated to send a security force that engages in disarmament because of all of the obvious security and political risks.
Look,
in
the
this.
IDF couldn't do it.
That's
The IDF
what
couldn't do it. The IDF with 5 divisions in Gaza couldn't get Hamas to be eliminated militarily, which means that right now, given everything that's going on, it's only a political package, a political framework and agreement that may lead to Hamas relinquishing its arms in favor of a Palestinian security force, some sort of a Palestinian security force that has to be sanctioned by the PA. Dennis?
So let me offer what is maybe a bridge between these 2 points. The Egyptian approach is to kind of negotiate the Hamas acquiescence, and in return for their acquiescence of some kind of symbolic disarmament, they get a political payoff. But there is another way to think about this. Hamas has an ideology, and that ideology is still ultimately a populist one. Now, if the International Stability Force's purpose is to come in and its real role is not just to prevent smuggling, but to protect the Gazan population. It doesn't have to go in theory to go in to fight Hamas, but if it's going in to protect the Gazan population, we know the population is quite alienated from Hamas. And the more that public feels protected, the more they're going to express these views. Now, Hamas, under those circumstances, is not going to want to look like it's trying to resist the whole process and fight the public. So, under those circumstances, they're likely to rationalize some kind of acquiescence and then think in their own minds, all right, over time, we'll find a way to recoup. It seems to me that if the mission becomes one of protecting the Gazan public, producing law and order, that gives you the best pathway to produce an outcome as it relates to Hamas not being in control and effectively giving up a good chunk of its military means.
Right?
No, I think that that makes sense. The only thing I would say here then, a lot of attention has to be put into the mandate of this international force, because one thing I can tell you for sure, Hamas will test how far they're willing to, how long, how much they can get away with. And you don't want a UNIFIL, what we have in Lebanon right now, where
Right.
Hezbollah goes to the UN forces, literally in a certain case slaps the one Hezbollah guy slaps the commander, and they don't even have the mandate to defend themselves. So there has to be a lot of kind of focus on what is the mandate, taking into account what we learned in terms of successes and failures of other regional things of the sort. Otherwise, Hamas will push the envelope, and they might end up being in control.
Okay, so since we're running out of time, I want to actually kind of zoom in. Now, I think we are all in agreement that in order to move from phase one to phase two, and we already mentioned that there's actually phase 2A and phase 2B, and then there's phase 3 as well. But in order to move from phase 1 to phase 2, 2A, whatever you want to call it, there needs to be another American package, right? There needs to be another kind of presidential intervention that says these are the principles that allow us to move from phase 1 to phase 2, and everybody please come to Sharm again and sign these agreements so that we could move forward. What is this package? Okay, what if you were now kind of designing and outlining that package that the Americans need to put forward? What is this package and what is its logic? Dennis, you want to start?
Well, I guess for me, that package starts with what we were just talking about. A focus on how law and order is going to be introduced, a focus on the interrelationship between the Board of Peace, the Technocratic Committee, and the International Stability Force. That needs to be clear. I'd like to see it embodied in a Security Council resolution, but I mean, that needs to be clear. And I think the need to focus on who is going to come in and play these roles and to work through the specifics of it, I think that's what's almost immediately necessary.
Right?
I mean, I think there are 2 points here to add. There has to be a clear assignment of, jobs and responsibilities for the different actors, and some pressure. I mean, on the one hand, I do see no alternative but to lean on Israel to accept a symbolic role for the Palestinian Authority. That's essential. But the flip side of this is there has to be a clear understanding or even marching orders from the US to the Arab countries saying, okay, we gave you a symbolic role for the Palestinian Authority, but it is your job, Saudi Arabia, UAE, whoever, to come and deliver the reformed Palestinian Authority, and to create clear benchmarks of how reform relates to the assumption of the PA's responsibilities. Ultimately, no one can impact the PA and leverage the PA and assist the PA in reform except for the Arab countries. The US is not going to do it. Europe is not going to do it. But the Arab countries have to be tasked with this, and they have to be held to account if they don't take this seriously.
Raith, I just want to dig in on that because I think this is crucial and it requires a little bit of a deeper dive. There is a kind of when you put the 20-point plan with the Blair, there is kind of a Blair idea or the Blair approach. There is a kind of the sequencing is not really laid out. And the sequencing is very problematic because within 2 or 3 years, the Palestinian Authority is supposed to be ready to take over Gaza. Until then, it has to be upgraded and reformed. Meanwhile, Blair is effectively referring to 2 legal systems, one legal system being introduced just for 2 or 3 years. And then in 3 years, there is another legal system coming in with the PA, which will likely be like the West Bank. I mean, it makes no sense to have different legal systems for the West Bank and Gaza. My point is, what I'm trying to suggest, following your point, is the following: that the upgrade and reform of the Palestinian Authority has to begin immediately with clear goals of what needs to be achieved within 2 years, clear, tangible goals, so that it is ready to take over Gaza from the International Security Force. It probably won't happen in 2, maybe in 3 or 4 years, okay? And therefore, another decision that has to happen right now is the reapplication of the laws of the PA and the Oslo Accords to Gaza. And I think this is all a package that comes together.
I mean, the reason why you need, at this stage, a symbolic presence for the PA in the whole structure is to send a message to everyone that we're still dealing with the same kind of political, diplomatic, legal unit between the two, even if the administration.
And that, as we mentioned, is essential for the reconstruction. Because otherwise, who would come in and build if the legal system is not in place?
Exactly. But also the reform of the PA has to take into account a lot of these kind of questions of the outdated or impractical things that you have in the Palestinian Authority itself. By the way, just one quick point here. 3 or 4 years in terms of technical reform is actually doable. You know, Salam Fayyad in a similar time zone when he was prime minister, or time frame when he was prime minister, did do the technical reform. The challenge with reform is actually political less than technical.
Yes. Dennis.
Can I just, I want to, you're talking, Giddy, about a package. And one of the reasons I agree with both of you that there needs to be an early focus on PA reform is that the way this packaging be put together from an administration standpoint should be, you go to the Saudis and others and say, you want point 19. You want to see self-determination. You want to see.
I just want to say, just to the audience, the Trump plan has points. The points are numbered, right? So Dennis is referring to point number 19 in the Trump plan that actually speaks about a political horizon in which the Palestinian side's right or aspiration for self-determination will be realized. By the way, point 20, even more remarkable, is that the Americans will facilitate Israeli-Palestinian discussion on that political horizon. Again, a major, I would say, deja vu with Oslo.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. But the point I was making is a little bit different. The point I was making as part of your package, if the Saudis and others want point 19 to be real, and meaning the political horizon is real, it is conditioned on Palestine, on the reform of the PA being, quote, faithfully carried out, unquote. So there is a dynamic here that if the Arabs want to see the political horizon actually emerge, they bear a responsibility to help ensure that reform is actually achieved. That becomes a sine qua non. We can talk about the sine qua non for Israeli withdrawal and reconstruction being demilitarization, but the sine qua non for the PA coming back in, reunifying the West Bank and Gaza politically, is a reform PA. If the PA goes through the motions of reform, look, Mohammed Mustafa had put together a reform plan on paper that on paper looks great, but it's not being carried out, and it won't be carried out unless
because there was no interest. Now there is an endpoint, a clear endpoint, a challenge.
Yeah.
You guys are going to be in charge. You got to be ready.
Right. You got to be ready. But there's nothing in the performance of the PA right now that suggests they will be, unless here's where this notion of Arab responsibility becomes key. They want the U.S. to play this role. The U.S. should be saying to them, for us to succeed, this is what we require from you. That's part of the package you're talking about to get to phase 2.
Yes, and I just want to say that in this context, we've spoken, I think this is our fourth conversation in this forum. In the past, we spoke about Marwan Barghouti and the critical role that he may play. And there you go, like 2 or 3 days ago, President Trump himself mentions a Palestinian prisoner by name, Marwan Barghouti. Now, Israel insists that Barghouti stays in jail, but maybe part of the deal is, hey, you Barghouti, you come out, you will be the one responsible for the reform. You have the relationship maybe with Hamas to be able to be that leader that, balances all these interests on the Palestinian side. I just found it very, very interesting that the President of the United States would mention by name an individual Palestinian prisoner that we have mentioned multiple times as well.
Well, it's clear to me that obviously a number of the Arab participants mentioned him, or the president would not have mentioned him. And it is interesting. This gets back to Ray's point. Here's where the administration will basically have to exert its leverage on Bibi, because politically for Bibi to go along with the release of Marwan Barghouti, to be fair to Bibi, the cost would be high to any Israeli prime minister to be releasing
Yes,
Barghouti.
unless it comes from Trump. If it comes from Trump, they can't say anything.
Absolutely.
With a big caveat. Beware of knights in shining armor. There is no messiah here. To think that you can solve this by releasing a guy whose track record is not particularly all that impressive would be, let's say, a cop out and taking a failed shortcut. The problems are structural, whether it's Marwan or a combination of people. There has to be adult supervision, and that can only be Arab to basically say Mr. X, Mr. Y, and they're all going to be Misters, unfortunately. You have to shape up. If you leave it pure to someone like Marwan, I am less confident that it's going to work out.
No, the reason I'm mentioning Marwan Barghouti is very, very simple. It has to do with the fact that Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas is in his 90th year. The implementation of the 20-point plan will leave, at the end of it, he will be 94. Okay, we've seen some leaders in history that led effectively to their late 80s. But I don't think we have seen someone who led into their mid-90s. This is just not happening. Meaning, on top of everything that is happening, there will need to be a transition of power on the Palestinian side. And I think the Americans are thinking about it the right way, saying, hey, we got to get ahead of this problem, because otherwise it could really come back to bite us. That's how I'm seeing it. They're just putting together the numbers, and they're understanding that on top of all this quagmire, there is a political succession that will have to unfold.
Yes, but again, I mean, I think they have the right idea. I'm not sure they have the right approach. Look, it's good that they're saying to Abu Mazen implicitly, what you're doing is kind of having an anointed successor who is also a failed leader is not going to fly. But again, I don't think there are shortcuts here. And in the same way that we saw in the previous reform efforts that we saw under George W. Bush required constant engagement by the Americans, no matter who you kind of have after Abu Mazen you have to have the US leading the process and at least delegating it with kind of a high degree of supervision.
Yes. So I just, since we're running out of time, and maybe for next time, I'd love to speak about the mandate of the International Security Force and all these other topics. I do want to close kind of a bigger picture, Dennis and Raith, and that is that we're all feeling that this is really a pivotal moment in Israeli-Palestinian relations. There is like a historic element to it. I just want to ask you kind of take a big picture, bird's eye view, and tell us what has been historic over the last 4 weeks. What are the things that will stick? Meaning, There are all these technical ideas that may change, deployment, 53, 47%, this, that, or the other. I get it. What are the things that you think that happened this week that are transformative and they will stay with us for years to come? Rafe, let's start with you, and Dennis, you get the closing word of this whole
Okay.
conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe
Go
two
ahead,
things here. One is actually the reassertion of American leadership on this issue. I think since the Biden administration, frankly, the U.S. has taken a back seat, and right now the U.S. is very, very much in the driver's seat, not only on the bilateral but on the regional, which really takes me to the second point, and we raised it before, but I want to reinforce it. Is this is the first time that I see that the Arab world is coming in with a much more forceful, much more emphatic role. Yes, there are a lot of tensions between Arab countries, but now the Arabs, as Dennis said, not only saying, well, they're not only deferring to the Palestinians, they are putting forward their own ideas. The real challenge right now is do you or can we maintain the American leadership? Because it's clear without it, it's not going to happen. And related to this, can we facilitate and do some basically deconfliction within the Arab countries to make sure that the Arabs are working together, not cross purposes? And that also requires a degree of American leadership. And these are two, I think these are going to be the make or break. And these are the kind of two new introductions that I've seen the last few weeks.
So let me just suggest 2 tweaks on what you said, and then we move to Dennis. First is American hegemony. We're not seeing any other superpower in the region. America is the hegemon here, all the way from Iran to, of course, Egypt and perhaps Morocco as well. America calls the shots, and it's not just Israel, Israeli-Palestinian, Gaza, West Bank. It's also in Syria, Lebanon, IMEC, etc. Second piece is that the Palestinian issue is back on the table, meaning if the Abraham Accords represented some sort of marginalization of the Palestinian issue, if the Saudi-Israel normalization deal would have meant that the Palestinian issue is totally sidelined, 2 years later, the Palestinian issue is at the center of Mideast politics and diplomacy, right? Those are the 2 points that you have made. Dennis.
Yeah, I would say there is a context here that we shouldn't dismiss. And that context is that Iran and its proxy network was dramatically weakened. And that reduced their leverage and coercive capability of others in the region, which gives them a freer hand to do things. I am reminded actually of how this feels a little bit like after 1991 and the defeat of Saddam Hussein in the Gulf War. At that time, nobody wanted to say no to the United States. Nobody wanted to say no to President Bush. Nobody wanted to say no to Secretary Baker. We have what is a comparable moment. I like to say in statecraft that timing is to statecraft what location is to real estate.
I love that quote from you.
Moments, by definition, don't last. We have a moment. We have a moment because Iran is weaker. We have a moment because those in the region don't want to say no to the United States. We have a moment because key Arabs, especially in the Gulf, realize you can't ignore the Palestinian issue, and they have to assume a responsibility. But like any moment, if you don't capitalize the right way, you'll find everything that looks really possible right now will dissipate. So not only is there a requirement for the youth to play a very intensive role to take advantage of the moment and to hold everybody's feet to the fire. I'm going to underscore that. Everybody's feet to the fire. The Israelis, the Saudis, the leverage with Turkey right now. Erdogan wants F-35s. Right? We have to be very clear what we require from them. We need to be clear what we require from them as a way of also saying how much more we will be prepared to do. So I am hopeful. I mean, I draw a distinction between being hopeful and optimistic. People who are optimistic think things will work out on their own. People who are hopeful realize you have a possibility. But to realize the possibility, you're going to have to act a lot on your own. I think that's one of the messages both Rafe and I come away with.
Yes, and I think that if you look at the 1990s, early 2000s, that American moment lasted for a few years. I just want to add another tweak to it, and that is that then it was the beginning of the Clinton presidency. Now it's the beginning of the Trump presidency. So there is like a full presidency to work with. Clinton actually continued also for another term. but the window, that American window of dominance and hegemony, actually lasted, I would say, almost 10 years. So there's a few years to work with, but at some point it dissipates. Can I just throw in a couple more observations for your feedback about what's historic, about what's going on right now? First of all, the idea of annexation for the time being is off the table. That is a huge, huge change in, first of all, within the Israeli political system, but also in terms of the expectations of Israel, because as late as just a few weeks ago, very senior people, I'm not just talking Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, I'm talking about even Dermer spoke about the possibility of annexation in the West Bank and did not rule out annexation.
Jordan Valley.
I'm sorry, Jordan
Jordan
Valley.
Valley.
All of that is off the table, and I think that's a big one. The other thing is that Gaza and the West Bank are a single territorial unit politically. And that is also, I think, kind of another, I would say, guardrail for any future political process. And it is the Palestinian Authority that is the self-governing body that eventually will govern both sides. And at the end of the day, what we saw right now is the reaffirmation of the notion that there are two indigenous people in that land. Both of them have the right to self-determination. And therefore, it's kind of a reintroduction of the Trump plan of January 2020. That is, the cornerstone is the principle of two nation states for two people. So I think it's, when we say it's historic, sometimes we're unable to translate it, but this is historic. Like, this is very, very big. Now, I know I said that you guys will get the closing statement, and now I added my piece. So now I'm going back to you. If you want to really close this conversation and have the last word, Raith?
As a reaction to what you said, what's really remarkable in these developments is that substantively, they were driven by Arab countries. Arab countries used to be passive. I can assure you, these ideas were not developed within the Trump State Department, etc. These are ideas that came from the Arab countries, and it gives you a sense of how a positive relation between some of those Arab countries and the US can actually help shape and drive some of these interests, and frankly help the administration as well fine-tune its approach. So
the Saudi-French initiative that everybody dismissed.
Saudi-French
in
initiative,
retrospect, if you work your way back, it may have made a big difference.
Yeah, I agree.
Look at the language. That was the first condemnation of Hamas. That was calling for disarmament of Hamas. That set basically some parameters, and it was, as Raith is right, it came largely from the Saudis, by the way. Largely from them.
Yeah. So Saudi, again, another long-lasting effect is the emergence of Saudi as a leader in the peace process. The Saudis had the Saudi initiative of 2002, 2007, normalization. Then they kind of took a more passive, but now they leaned in the summer together with the French. And now they're again in a leadership position. And of course, Egypt also, I think, is back in the game in new ways. And of course, the UAE. Guys, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. I know that at the end of the day, we share this conversation with people. By the way, I'm getting feedback from many, many different places about these conversations. I hope that you do. But I would have enjoyed this conversation even if nobody else hears about it.
So would we, but it's a bonus that others hear about.
Yes. All right, guys. So thank you very, very much. Really a pleasure spending time with you. And hopefully we'll have more good news coming soon.
Let's hope so.
Absolutely.
If you made it to this point, you just heard Dennis Ross and Raith El-Omri sharing their vast knowledge and experience so that all of us can understand the dramatic diplomatic process that is unfolding right now in the Middle East in order to end the Israel-Hamas war and transition the region into a future of stability and prosperity and security. Thank you very much.